morning. You're through to the Tourist Information Office. Tim speaking. How can I help you?
Oh, hello. Could you give me some information about next month's festival, please? My family and I will be staying in the town that week.
Of course. Well, it starts with a concert on the afternoon of the 17th.
Oh, I heard about that. The orchestra and singers come from the USA, don't they?
They're from Canada. They're very popular over there. They're going to perform a number of well-known pieces that will appeal to children as well as adults.
That sounds good. My whole family are interested in music.
The next day, the 18th, there's a performance by a ballet company called Eustatis.
Sorry?
The name is spelt E-U-S-T-A-T-I-S. They appeared in last year's festival and went down very well. Again, their programme is designed for all ages.
Good. I expect we'll go to that. I hope there's going to be a play during the festival. A comedy, ideally.
You're in luck. On the 19th and 20th, a local amateur group are performing one written by a member of the group. It's called Jemima. That'll be on in the town hall. They've already performed it 2 or 3 times. I haven't seen it myself, but the review in the local paper was very good.
And is it suitable for children?
Yes. In fact, it's aimed more at children than at adults. So both performances are in the afternoon.
And what about dance? Will there be any performances?
Yes, also on the 20th, but in the evening. A professional company is putting on a show of modern pieces with electronic music by young composers.
Uh-huh.
The show is about how people communicate, or fail to communicate with each other, so it's got the rather strange name, Chat.
I suppose that's because that's something we do both face-to-face and online.
That's right. Now, there are also some workshops and other activities. They'll all take place at least once every day, so everyone who wants to take part will have a chance.
Good. We're particularly interested in cookery. You don't happen to have a cookery workshop, do you?
We certainly do. It's going to focus on how to make food part of a healthy lifestyle. And it'll show that even sweet things like cakes can contain much less sugar than they usually do.
That might be worth going to. We're trying to encourage our children to cook.
Another workshop is just for children, and that's on creating posters to reflect the history of the town. The aim is to make children aware of how both the town and people's lives have changed over the centuries. The results will be exhibited in the community centre. Then, the other workshop is in toy making, and that's for adults only.
Oh, why's that?
Because it involves carpentry. Participants will be making toys out of wood, so there'll be a lot of sharp chisels and other tools around.
It makes sense to keep children away from it.
Exactly. Now, let me tell you about some of the outdoor activities. There'll be supervised wild swimming.
Wild swimming? What's that?
It just means swimming in natural waters, rather than a swimming pool.
Oh, okay. In a lake, for instance.
Yes. There's a beautiful one just outside the town, and that'll be the venue for the swimming. There'll be lifeguards on duty, so it's suitable for all ages. And finally, there'll be a walk in some nearby woods every day. The leader is an expert on insects. He'll show some that live in the woods and how important they are for the environment. So there are going to be all sorts of different things to do during the festival.
There certainly are.
If you'd like to read about how the preparations for the festival are going, the festival organizer is keeping a blog. Just search online for the festival website, and you'll find it.
Well, thank you very much for all the information.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I'm very pleased to welcome this evening's guest speaker, Mark Logan, who's going to tell us about the recent transformation of Minster Park. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. I'm sure you're all familiar with Minster Park. It's been a feature of the city for well over a century and has been the responsibility of the City Council for most of that time. What perhaps isn't so well known is the origin of the park. Unlike many public parks that started in private ownership, as the garden of a large house, for instance, Minster was some wasteland, which people living nearby started planting with flowers in 1892. It was unclear who actually owned the land, and this wasn't settled until 20 years later, when the council took possession of it. You may have noticed the statue near one of the entrances. It's of Diane Gosforth, who played a key role in the history of the park. Once the council had become the legal owner, it planned to sell the land for housing. Many local people wanted it to remain a place that everyone could go to enjoy the fresh air and natural environment. Remember, the park is in a densely populated residential area. Diane Gosforth was one of those people, and she organised petitions and demonstrations, which eventually made the council change its mind about the future of the land. Soon after this, the First World War broke out in 1914, and most of the park was dug up and planted with vegetables, which were sold locally. At one stage, the army considered taking it over for troop exercises and got as far as contacting the city council, then decided the park was too small to be of use. There were occasional public meetings during the war in an area that had been retained as grass. After the war, the park was turned back more or less to how it had been before 1914 and continued almost unchanged until recently. Plans for transforming it were drawn up at various times, most recently in 2013, though they were revised in 2015 before any work had started. The changes finally got going in 2016 and were finished on schedule last year. OK, let me tell you about some of the changes that have been made and some things that have been retained. If you look at this map, you'll see the familiar outline of the park, with the river forming the northern boundary, and a gate in each of the other three walls. The statue of Diane Gosforth has been moved. It used to be close to the south gate, but it's now immediately to the north of the lily pond, almost in the centre of the park, which makes it much more visible. There's a new area of wooden sculptures, which are on the riverbank, where the path from the east gate makes a sharp bend. There are two areas that are particularly intended for children. The playground has been enlarged and improved, and that's between the river and the path that leads from the pond to the river. Then there's a new maze, a circular series of paths separated by low hedges. That's near the west gate. You go north from there towards the river and then turn left to reach it. There have been tennis courts in the park for many years, and they've been doubled, from 4 to 8. They're still in the southwest corner of the park, where there's a right-angle bend in the path. Something else I'd like to mention is the new fitness area. This is right next to the lily pond on the same side as the west gate. Now, as you're all gardeners, I'm sure you'll like to hear about the plants that have been chosen for the park.
OK, Graham, so let's check we both know what we're supposed to be doing.
OK.
So, for the university's open day, we have to plan a display on British life and literature in the mid-19th century.
That's right. But we'll have some people to help us find the materials and set it up, remember? For the moment, we just need to plan it.
Good. So, have you gathered who's expected to come and see the display? Is it for the people studying English or students from other departments? I'm not clear about it.
Nor me. That was how it used to be, but it didn't attract many people, so this year it's going to be part of an open day to raise the university's profile. It'll be publicised in the city to encourage people to come and find out something of what goes on here, and it's included in the information that's sent to people who are considering applying to study here next year.
Presumably, some current students and lecturers will come?
I would imagine so. But we've been told to concentrate on the other categories of people.
Right. We don't have to cover the whole range of 19th century literature, do we?
No, it's entirely up to us. I suggest just using Charles Dickens.
That's a good idea. Most people have heard of him and have probably read some of his novels or seen films based on them. So that's a good lead-in to life in his time.
Exactly. And his novels show the awful conditions that most people had to live in, don't they? He wanted to shock people into doing something about it.
Did he do any campaigning other than writing?
Yes, he campaigned for education and other social reforms and gave talks. But I'm inclined to ignore that and focus on the novels.
Yes, I agree. OK, so now shall we think about a topic linked to each novel?
Yes, I've printed out a list of Dickens's novels in the order they were published, in the hope you'd agree to focus on him.
You're lucky I did agree. Let's have a look. OK, the first was The Pickwick Papers, published in 1836. It was very successful when it came out, wasn't it? And was adapted for the theatre straight away.
There's an interesting point, though, that there's a character who keeps falling asleep, and that medical condition was named after the book, Pickwickian syndrome.
Oh, so why don't we use that as the topic and include some quotations from the novel?
Right. Next is Oliver Twist.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot in the novel about poverty, but maybe something less obvious.
Well, Oliver is taught how to steal, isn't he? We could use that to illustrate the fact that very few children went to school, particularly not poor children, so they learnt in other ways.
Good idea. What's next?
Maybe Nicholas Nickleby? Actually, he taught in a really cruel school, didn't he?
That's right. But there's also the company of touring actors that Nicholas joins. We could do something on theatres and other amusements of the time. We don't want only the bad things, do we?
OK.
What about Martin Chuzzlewit? He goes to the USA, doesn't he?
Yes. And Dickens himself had been there a year before and drew on his experience there in the novel.
I wonder, though. The main theme is selfishness. So we could do something on social justice? No, too general. Let's keep to your idea. I think it would work well.
He wrote Bleak House next. That's my favourite of his novels.
Yes, mine too.
Oh,
His satire of the legal system is pretty powerful.
that's true. But think about Esther, the heroine. As a child, she lives with someone she doesn't know is her aunt, who treats her very badly. Then she's very happy living with her guardian, and he puts her in charge of the household. And at the end, she gets married, and her guardian gives her and her husband a house, where, of course, they're very happy.
Yes, I like that.
What shall we take next? Little Dorrit? Old Mr. Dorrit has been in a debtor's prison for years.
So was Dickens's father, wasn't he?
That's right.
What about focusing on the part when Mr. Dorrit inherits a fortune and he starts pretending he's always been rich?
Good idea.
OK. So next we need to think about what materials we want to illustrate each issue. That's going to be quite hard.
I'm going to report on a case study of a programme which has been set up to help rural populations in Mozambique, a largely agricultural country in Southeast Africa. The programme worked with 3 communities in Chiqualaquala district, near the Limpopo River. This is a dry and arid region with unpredictable rainfall. Because of this, people in the area were unable to support themselves through agriculture, and instead they used the forest as a means of providing themselves with an income, mainly by selling charcoal. However, this was not a sustainable way of living in the long term, as they were rapidly using up this resource. To support agriculture in this dry region, the programme focused primarily on making use of existing water resources from the Limpopo River by setting up systems of irrigation, which would provide a dependable water supply for crops and animals. The programme worked closely with the district government in order to find the best way of implementing this. The region already had one farmers' association, and it was decided to set up 2 more of these. These associations planned and carried out activities including water management, livestock breeding and agriculture, and it was notable that in general women formed the majority of the workforce. It was decided that in order to keep the crops safe from animals, both wild and domestic, special areas should be fenced off where the crops could be grown. The community was responsible for creating these fences, but the programme provided the necessary wire for making them. Once the area had been fenced off, it could be cultivated. The land was dug so that vegetables and cereals appropriate to the climate could be grown, and the programme provided the necessary seeds for this. The programme also provided pumps so that water could be brought from the river in pipes to the fields. However, the labour was all provided by local people, and they also provided and put up the posts that supported the fences around the fields. Once the programme had been set up, its development was monitored carefully. The farmers were able to grow enough produce not just for their own needs, but also to sell. However, getting the produce to places where it could be marketed was sometimes a problem, as the farmers did not have access to transport, and this resulted in large amounts of produce, especially vegetables, being spoiled. This problem was discussed with the farmers' associations, and it was decided that in order to prevent food from being spoiled, the farmers needed to learn techniques for its preservation. There was also an additional initiative that had not been originally planned, but which became a central feature of the programme. This was when farmers started to dig holes for tanks in the fenced-off areas, and to fill these with water and use them for breeding fish, an important source of protein. After a time, another suggestion was made by local people which hadn't been part of the programme's original proposal, but which was also adopted later on. They decided to try setting up colonies of bees, which would provide honey both for their own consumption and to sell. So, what lessons can be learned from this programme? First of all, it tells us that in dry, arid regions, If there is access to a reliable source of water, there is great potential for the development of agriculture. In Chiqualaquala, there was a marked improvement in agricultural production, which improved food security and benefited local people by providing them with both food and income. However, it's important to set realistic timelines for each phase of the programme, especially for its design, as mistakes made at this stage may be hard to correct later on. The programme demonstrates that sustainable development is possible in areas where there is...
Hello, William. This is Amber. You said to phone if I wanted to get more information about the job agency you mentioned. Is now a good time?
Hi, Amber. Yes, fine. So the agency I was talking about is called Bankside. They're based in Docklands. I can tell you the address now, 497 East Side.
OK, thanks. So is there anyone in particular I should speak to there?
The agent I always deal with is called Becky Jameson.
Let me write that down. Becky...
Jameson. Jameson.
Do you have her direct line?
Yes, it's in my contacts somewhere. Right, here we are. 07866 510 333. I wouldn't call her until the afternoon if I were you. She's always really busy in the morning trying to fill last-minute vacancies. She's really helpful and friendly, so I'm sure it would be worth getting in touch with her for an informal chat.
It's mainly clerical and admin jobs they deal with, isn't it?
That's right. I know you're hoping to find a full-time job in the media eventually, but Becky mostly recruits temporary staff for the finance sector, which will look good on your CV. And generally pays better too.
Yeah, I'm just a bit worried because I don't have much office experience.
I wouldn't worry. They'll probably start you as a receptionist or something like that. So what's important for that kind of job isn't so much having business skills or knowing lots of different computer systems. It's communication that really matters, so you'd be fine there. And you'll pick up office skills really quickly on the job. It's not that complicated.
OK, good. So how long do people generally need temporary staff for? It would be great if I could get something lasting at least a month.
That shouldn't be too difficult. But you're more likely to be offered something for a week at first, which might get extended. It's unusual to be sent somewhere for just a day or two.
Right. I've heard the pay isn't too bad. Better than working in a shop or a restaurant.
Oh, yes, definitely. The hourly rate is about £10, $11 if you're lucky.
That's pretty good. I was only expecting to get £8 or £9 an hour.
Do you want me to tell you anything about the registration process?
Yes, please. I know you have to have an interview.
The interview usually takes about an hour, and you should arrange that about a week in advance.
I suppose I should dress smartly if it's for office work. I can probably borrow a suit from Mum.
Good idea. It's better to look too smart than too casual.
Will I need to bring copies of my exam certificates or anything like that?
No, they don't need to see those, I don't think.
What about my passport?
Oh, yes, they will ask to see that.
OK.
I wouldn't get stressed about the interview, though. It's just a chance for them to build a relationship with you, so they can try and match you to a job which you'll like. So there are questions about personality that they always ask candidates, fairly basic ones, and they probably won't ask anything too difficult, like what your plans are for the future.
Hope not.
Anyway, there are lots of benefits to using an agency. For example, the interview will be useful because they'll give you feedback on your performance so you can improve next time.
And they'll have access to jobs which aren't advertised.
Exactly. Most temporary jobs aren't advertised.
And I expect finding a temporary job this way takes a lot less time. It's much easier than ringing up individual companies.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think I've covered everything.
Good morning. My name's Erica Matthews, and I'm the owner of Matthews Island Holidays, a company set up by my parents. Thank you for coming to this presentation, in which I hope to interest you in what we have to offer. We're a small family-run company, and we believe in the importance of the personal touch. So we don't aim to compete with other companies on the number of customers. What we do is build on our many years' experience, more than almost any other rail holiday company, to ensure we provide perfect holidays in a small number of destinations, which we've got to know extremely well. I'll start with our 6-day Isle of Man holiday. This is a fascinating island in the Irish Sea, with Wales to the south, England to the east, Scotland to the north, and Northern Ireland to the west. Our holiday starts in Heysham, where your tour manager will meet you. Then you'll travel by ferry to the Isle of Man. Some people prefer to fly from Luton instead, and another popular option is to go by train to Liverpool and take a ferry from there. You have 5 nights in the hotel, and the price covers 5 breakfasts and dinners, and lunch on the 3 days when there are organised trips. Day 4 is free, and most people have lunch in a cafe or restaurant in Douglas. The price of the holiday includes the ferry to the Isle of Man, all travel on the island, the hotel, and the meals I've mentioned. Incidentally, we try to make booking our holidays as simple and fair as possible. So, unlike with many companies, the price is the same whether you book 6 months in advance or at the last minute, and there's no supplement for single rooms in hotels. If you make a booking, then need to change the start date, for example because of illness, you're welcome to change to an alternative date or a different tour for a small administrative fee. Okay, so what does the holiday consist of? Well, on day 1, you'll arrive in time for a short introduction by your tour manager, followed by dinner in the hotel. The dining room looks out at the river, close to where it flows into the harbour, and there's usually plenty of activity going on. On day 2, you'll take the coach to the small town of Peel, on the way calling in at the Tynwald exhibition. The Isle of Man isn't part of the United Kingdom, and it has its own parliament called Tynwald. It's claimed that this is the world's oldest parliament that's still functioning, and that it dates back to 979. However, the earliest surviving reference to it is from 1422, so perhaps it isn't quite as old as it claims. Day 3, we have a trip to the mountain Snaefell. This begins with a leisurely ride along the promenade in Douglas in a horse-drawn tram. Then you board an electric train which takes you to the fishing village of Laxey. From there, it's an 8-kilometre ride in the Snaefell Mountain Railway to the top. Lunch will be in the cafe, giving you spectacular views of the island. Day 4 is free for you to explore, using the pass which we'll give you. So you won't have to pay for travel on local transport or for entrance to the island's heritage sites. Or you might just want to take it easy in Douglas and perhaps do a little light shopping. The last full day, day 5, is for some people the highlight of the holiday, with a ride on the steam railway from Douglas to Port Erin. After some time to explore, a coach will take you to the headland that overlooks the Calf of Man, a small island just off the coast. From there, you continue to Castletown, which used to be the capital of the Isle of Man and its medieval castle. And on day 6, it's back to the ferry, or the airport if you flew to the island, and time to go home. Now, I'd like to tell you a bit more.
Ed, how are you getting on with the reading for our presentation next week?
Well, okay, Ruth, but there's so much of it.
I know. I hadn't realised birth order was such a popular area of research.
But the stuff on birth order and personality is mostly unreliable. From what I've been reading, a lot of the claims about how your position in the family determines certain personality traits are just stereotypes, with no robust evidence to support them.
OK, but that's an interesting point. We could start by outlining what previous research has shown. There are studies going back over 100 years.
Yeah, so we could just run through some of the typical traits. Like the consensus seems to be that oldest children are generally less well-adjusted because they never get over the arrival of a younger sibling.
Right, but on a positive note, some studies claim that they were thought to be good at nurturing. Certainly in the past, when people had large families, they would have been expected to look after the younger ones.
There isn't such a clear picture for middle children, but one trait that a lot of the studies mention is that they are easier to get on with than older or younger siblings.
Generally eager to please and helpful, although that's certainly not accurate as far as my family goes. My middle brother was a nightmare, always causing fights and envious of whatever I had.
As I said, none of this seems to relate to my own experience. I'm the youngest in my family, and I don't recognise myself in any of the studies I've read about. I'm supposed to have been a sociable and confident child who made friends easily, but I was actually terribly shy.
Really? That's funny. There have been hundreds of studies on twins, but mostly about nurture versus nature.
There was one on personality which said that a twin is likely to be quite shy in social situations because they always have their twin around to depend on for support.
My cousins were like that when they were small. They were only interested in each other and found it hard to engage with other kids. They're fine now, though.
Only children have had a really bad press. A lot of studies have branded them as loners who think the world revolves around them because they've never had to fight for their parents' attention.
That does seem a bit harsh. One category I hadn't considered before was children with much older siblings. A couple of studies mentioned that these children grow up more quickly and are expected to do basic things for themselves, like getting dressed.
I can see how that might be true, although I expect they're sometimes the exact opposite, playing the baby role and clamouring for special treatment.
What was the problem with most of these studies, do you think?
I think it was because, in a lot of cases, data was collected from only one sibling per family, who rated him or herself and his or her siblings at the same time.
Some of the old research into the relationship between birth order and academic achievement has been proved to be accurate, though. Performances in intelligence tests declined slightly from the eldest child to his or her younger siblings. This has been proved in lots of recent studies.
Yes, although what many of them didn't take into consideration was family size. The more siblings there are, the likelier the family is to have a low socio-economic status, which can also account for differences between siblings in academic performance.
The oldest boy might be given more opportunities than his younger sisters, for example.
Exactly.
But the main reason for the marginally higher academic performance of oldest children is quite surprising, I think. It's not only that they benefit intellectually from extra attention at a young age, which is what I would have expected. It's that they benefit from being teachers for their younger siblings by verbalising processes.
Right. And this gives them status and confidence, which again contributes in a small way to better performance. So, would you say sibling rivalry has been a useful thing for you?
I think so. My younger brother was incredibly annoying, and we fought a lot. But I think this has made me a stronger person. I know how to defend myself. We had some terrible arguments, and I would have died rather than apologise to him. But we had to put up with each other, and most of the time we coexisted amicably enough.
Yes, my situation was pretty similar. But I don't think having two older brothers made me any less selfish. I was never prepared to let my brothers use any of my stuff.
That's perfectly normal, whereas sometimes...
Today, I'm going to talk about the eucalyptus tree. This is a very common tree here in Australia, where it's also sometimes called the gum tree. First, I'm going to talk about why it's important. Then I'm going to describe some problems it faces at present. Right, well, the eucalyptus tree is an important tree for lots of reasons. For example, it gives shelter to creatures like birds and bats, and these and other species also depend on it for food, particularly the nectar from its flowers. So it supports biodiversity. It's useful to us humans too, because we can kill germs with a disinfectant made from oil extracted from eucalyptus leaves. The eucalyptus grows all over Australia, and the trees can live for up to 400 years. So it's alarming that all across the country, numbers of eucalyptus are falling because the trees are dying off prematurely. So what are the reasons for this? One possible reason is disease. As far back as the 1970s, the trees started getting a disease called Mundula yellows. The tree's leaves would gradually turn yellow, then the tree would die. It wasn't until 2004 that they found the cause of the problem was lime, or calcium hydroxide, to give it its proper chemical name, which was being used in the construction of roads. The lime was being washed away into the ground and affecting the roots of the eucalyptus trees nearby. What it was doing was preventing the trees from sucking up the iron they needed for healthy growth. When this was injected back into the affected trees, they immediately recovered. But this problem only affected a relatively small number of trees. By 2000, huge numbers of eucalyptus were dying along Australia's east coast of a disease known as bell miner-associated dieback. The bell miner is a bird, and the disease seems to be common where there are high populations of bell miners. Again, it's the leaves of the trees that are affected. What happens is that insects settle on the leaves and eat their way round them, destroying them as they go, and at the same time they secrete a solution which has sugar in it. The bell miner birds really like this solution, and in order to get as much as possible, they keep away other creatures that might try to get it. So these birds and insects flourish at the expense of other species, and eventually so much damage is done to the leaves that the tree dies. But experts say that trees can start looking sick before any sign of bell miner-associated dieback. So it looks as if the problem might have another explanation. One possibility is that it's to do with the huge bushfires that we have in Australia. A theory proposed over 40 years ago by ecologist William Jackson is that the frequency of bushfires in a particular region affects the type of vegetation that grows there. If there are very frequent bushfires in a region, this encourages grass to grow afterwards, while if the bushfires are rather less frequent, this results in the growth of eucalyptus forests. So why is this? Why do fairly frequent bushfires actually support the growth of eucalyptus? Well, one reason is that the fire stops the growth of other species which would consume water needed by eucalyptus trees. And there's another reason. If these other quick-growing species of bushes and plants are allowed to proliferate, they harm the eucalyptus in another way by affecting the composition of the soil and removing nutrients from it. So some bushfires are actually essential for the eucalyptus to survive as long as they are not too frequent. In fact, there's evidence that Australia's Indigenous people practiced regular burning of bushland for thousands of years before the arrival of the Europeans. But since Europeans arrived on the continent, the number of bushfires has been strictly controlled. Now, scientists believe that this reduced frequency of bushfires to low levels has led to what's known as dry rainforest, which seems an odd name as usually we associate tropical rainforest with wet conditions. And what's special about this type of rainforest? Well, unlike tropical rainforest, which is a rich ecosystem, this type of ecosystem is usually a simple one. It has very thick, dense vegetation, but not much variety of species. The vegetation provides lots of shade, so one species that does find it ideal is the bell myna bird, which builds its nests in the undergrowth there. But again, that's not helpful for the eucalyptus tree.
Good morning. Thanks for coming in to see us here at the agency, Joe. I'm one of the agency representatives, and my name's Sally Baker.
Hi, Sally. I think we spoke on the phone, didn't we?
That's right, we did. So thank you for sending in your CV. We've had quite a careful look at it, and I think we have 2 jobs that might be suitable for you.
OK.
The first one is in a company based in North London. They're looking for an administrative assistant.
OK. What sort of company is it?
They're called Home Solutions, and they design and make furniture.
Oh, I don't know much about that, but it sounds interesting.
Yes, well, as I said, they want someone in their office, and looking at your past experience, it does look as if you fit quite a few of the requirements. So on your CV, it appears you've done some data entry?
Yes.
So that's one skill they want. Then they expect the person they appoint to attend meetings and take notes there.
OK. I've done that before, yes.
And you need to be able to cope with general admin.
Filing and keeping records and so on. But that should be OK. And in my last job, I also had to manage the diary.
Excellent. That's something they want here too. I'd suggest you add it to your CV. I don't think you mentioned that, did you?
No.
So, as far as the requirements go, they want good computer skills, of course, and they particularly mention spreadsheets.
That should be fine.
And interpersonal skills, which would be something they'd check with your references.
I think that should be OK, yes.
Then they mention that they want someone who is careful and takes care with details. Just looking at your CV, I'd say you're probably all right there.
I think so, yes. Do they want any special experience?
I think they wanted some experience of teleconferencing.
Oh, I've got 3 years' experience of that.
Let's see. Yes, good. In fact, they're only asking for at least 1 year, so that's great. So is that something that might interest you?
It is, yes. The only thing is, you said they were in North London, so it would be quite a long commute for me.
OK. So the second position might suit you better as far as the location goes. That's for a warehouse assistant, and that's in South London.
Yes, that would be a lot closer.
And you've worked in a warehouse before, haven't you?
Yes.
So as far as the responsibilities for this position go, they want someone who could manage the stock, obviously, and also deliveries.
That should be OK. You've got to keep track of stuff, but I've always been quite good with numbers.
Good. That's their first requirement. And they want someone who's computer literate, which we know you are.
Sure.
Then they mention organisational skills. They want someone who's well organised.
Yes, I think I am.
And tidy?
Yes. They go together, really, don't they?
Sure. Then the usual stuff. They want someone who can communicate well, both orally and in writing.
OK. And for the last warehouse job I had, one of the things I enjoyed most was being part of a team. I found that was really essential for the job.
Excellent. Yes, they do mention that they want someone who's used to that, yes. Now, when you were working in a warehouse last time, What sorts of items were you dealing with?
It was mostly bathroom and kitchen equipment, sinks and stoves and fridges.
So you're okay moving heavy things?
Sure, I'm quite strong and I've had the training.
Good. Now, as far as experience goes, they mention they want someone with a licence and that you have experience of driving in London, so you can cope with the traffic and so on.
Yes, no problem.
And you've got experience of warehouse work. And the final thing they mention is customer service. I think, looking at your CV, you're okay there.
Right. So, what about pay? Can you tell me a bit more about that, please?
My guest on the show today is Alice Riches, who started the Street Play scheme where she lives in Beechwood Road. For those of you that don't already know, Street Play involves local residents closing off their street for a few hours so that children have a chance to play in the streets safely. She started it in her own street, Beechwood Road, and the idea caught on. And there are now Street Play schemes all over the city. So, when did you actually start the scheme, Alice?
Well, I first had the idea when my oldest child was still a toddler. So that's about 6 years ago now. But it took at least 2 years of campaigning before we were actually able to make it happen. So the scheme's been up and running for 3 years now. We'd love to be able to close our road for longer, for the whole weekend, from Saturday morning until Sunday evening, for example. At the moment, it's just once a week. But when we started, it was only once a month. But we're working on it.
So, what actually happens when Beechwood Road is closed?
We have volunteer wardens, mostly parents, but some elderly residents too, who block off our road at either end. The council have provided special signs, but there's always a volunteer there to explain what's happening to any motorists. Generally, they're fine about it. We've only had to get the police involved once or twice. Now, I should explain that the road isn't completely closed to cars, but only residents' cars are allowed. If people really need to get in or out of Beechwood Road, it's not a problem as long as they drive at under 20 kilometres per hour. But most people just decide not to use their cars during this time, or they park in another street. The wardens are only there to stop through traffic.
So, can anyone apply to get involved in Street Play?
Absolutely. We want to include all kids in the city, especially those who live on busy roads. It's here that demand is greatest. Obviously, there isn't such demand in wealthier areas where the children have access to parks or large gardens, or in the suburbs where there are usually more places for children to play outside. I'd recommend that anyone listening who likes the idea should just give it a go. We've been surprised by the positive reaction of residents all over the city, and that's not just parents. There are always a few who complain, but they're a tiny minority. On the whole, everyone is very supportive and say they're very happy to see children out on the street, even if it does get quite noisy. There have been so many benefits of street play for the kids. Parents really like the fact that the kids are getting fresh air instead of sitting staring at a computer screen, even if they're not doing anything particularly energetic. And of course, it's great that kids can play with their friends outside without being supervised by their parents. But for me, the biggest advantage is that kids develop confidence in themselves to be outside without their parents. The other really fantastic thing is that children get to know the adults in the street. It's like having a big extended family.
It certainly does have a lot of benefits. I want to move on now and ask you about a related project in King Street.
Right. Well, this was an experiment I was involved in, where local residents decided to try and reduce the traffic along King Street, which is the busiest main road in our area, by persuading people not to use their cars for one day. We thought about making people pay more for parking, but we decided that would be really unpopular. So instead, we just stopped people from parking on King Street, but left the other car parks open. It was surprising how much of a difference all this made. As we'd predicted, air quality was significantly better. But what I hadn't expected was how much quieter it would be, even with the buses still running. Of course, everyone said they felt safer, but we were actually amazed that sales in the shops went up considerably that day. We thought there'd be fewer people out shopping, not more.
That's really interesting. So the fact that the street was...
Tom, could I ask you for some advice, please?
Yes, of course. If you think I can help. What's it about?
It's my first media studies assignment, and I'm not sure how to go about it. You must have done it last year.
Is that the one comparing the coverage of a particular story in a range of newspapers?
That's right.
Oh, yes. I really enjoyed writing it.
So, what sort of things do I need to compare?
Well, there are several things. For example, there's the question of which page of the newspaper the item appears on.
You mean because there's a big difference between having it on the front page and the bottom of page 10, for instance?
Exactly. And that shows how important the editor thinks the story is. Then there's the size. How many column inches the story is given. How many columns it spreads over.
And I suppose that includes the headline.
It certainly does. It's all part of attracting the reader's attention.
What about graphics? Whether there's anything visual in addition to the text?
Yes, you need to consider those too, because they can have a big effect on the reader's understanding of the story. Sometimes a bigger effect than the text itself. Then you'll need to look at how the item is put together. What structure is it given? Bear in mind that not many people read beyond the first paragraph. So what has the journalist put at the beginning? And if, say, there are conflicting opinions about something, does one appear near the end where people probably won't read it?
And newspapers sometimes give wrong or misleading information, don't they? Either deliberately or by accident. Should I be looking at that too?
Yes, if you can. Compare what's in different versions. And as far as possible, try and work out what's true and what isn't. And that relates to a very important point. What's the writer's purpose? Or at least the most important one, if they have several. It may seem to be to inform the public, but often it's that they want to create fear or controversy, or to make somebody look ridiculous.
Gosh, I see what you mean. And I suppose the writer may make assumptions about the reader.
That's right. About their knowledge of the subject, their attitudes, and their level of education, which means writing so that the readers understand without feeling patronised. All of that will make a difference to how the story is presented.
Does it matter what type of story I write about?
No. National or international politics, the arts, anything, as long as it's covered in 2 or 3 newspapers. Though, of course, it'll be easier and more fun if it's something you're interested in and know something about.
And on that basis, a national news item would be worth analysing. I'm quite keen on politics, so I'll try and find a suitable topic. What did you choose for your analysis, Tom?
I was interested in how newspapers expressed their opinions explicitly. So I wanted to compare editorials in different papers, but when I started looking, I couldn't find 2 on the same topic that I felt like analysing.
In that case, I won't even bother to look.
So in the end, I chose a human interest story, a terribly emotional story about a young girl who was very ill, and lots of other people, mostly strangers, raised money so she could go abroad for treatment. Actually, I was surprised. Some papers just wrote about how wonderful everyone was, but others considered the broader picture, like why treatment wasn't available here.
I usually find stories like that raise quite strong feelings in me. I'll avoid that. Perhaps I'll choose an arts topic, like different reviews of a film or something about funding for the arts. I'll think about that.
Yes, that might be interesting.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for your help, Tom. It's been really useful.
You're welcome. Good luck with the assignment, Hazel.
Nowadays, we use different products for personal cleanliness, laundry, dishwashing and household cleaning, but this is very much a 20th century development. The origins of cleanliness date back to prehistoric times. Since water is essential for life, the earliest people lived near water and knew something about its cleansing properties, at least that it rinsed mud off their hands. During the excavation of ancient Babylon, evidence was found that soap making was known as early as 2800 BC. Archaeologists discovered cylinders made of clay, with inscriptions on them saying that fats were boiled with ashes. This is a method of making soap, though there's no reference to the purpose of this material. The early Greeks bathed for aesthetic reasons and apparently didn't use soap. Instead, they cleaned their bodies with blocks of sand, pumice and ashes, then anointed themselves with oil and scraped off the oil and dirt with a metal instrument known as a strigil. They also used oil mixed with ashes. Clothes were washed without soap in streams. The ancient Germans and Gauls are also credited with discovering how to make a substance called soap, made of melted animal fat and ashes. They used this mixture to tint their hair red. Soap got its name, according to an ancient Roman legend, from Mount Sapo, where animals were sacrificed, leaving deposits of animal fat. Rain washed these deposits, along with wood ashes, down into the clay soil along the river Tiber. Women found that this mixture greatly reduced the effort required to wash their clothes. As Roman civilization advanced, so did bathing. The first of the famous Roman baths, supplied with water from their aqueducts, was built around 312 BC. The baths were luxurious, and bathing became very popular. And by the 2nd century AD, the Greek physician Galen recommended soap for both medicinal and cleansing purposes. After the fall of Rome in 467 AD and the resulting decline in bathing habits, much of Europe felt the impact of filth on public health. This lack of personal cleanliness and related unsanitary living conditions were major factors in the outbreaks of disease in the Middle Ages, and especially the Black Death of the 14th century. Nevertheless, soap-making became an established craft in Europe, and associations of soap-makers guarded their trade secrets closely. Vegetable and animal oils were used with ashes of plants, along with perfume, apparently for the first time. Gradually, more varieties of soap became available for shaving and shampooing, as well as bathing and laundering. A major step toward large-scale commercial soap-making occurred in 1791, when a French chemist, Nicolas Leblanc, patented a process for turning salt into soda ash, or sodium carbonate. Soda ash is the alkali obtained from ashes that combines with fat to form soap. The Leblanc process yielded quantities of good quality, inexpensive soda ash. Modern soap making was born some 20 years later, in the early 19th century, with the discovery by Michel-Eugène Chevreul, another French chemist, of the chemical nature and relationship of fats, glycerine and fatty acids. His studies established the basis for both fat and soap chemistry, and soap making became a science. Further developments during the 19th century made it easier and cheaper to manufacture soap. Until the 19th century, soap was regarded as a luxury item, and was heavily taxed in several countries. As it became more readily available, it became an everyday necessity, a development that was reinforced when the high tax was removed. Soap was then something ordinary people could afford, and cleanliness standards improved. With this widespread use came the development of milder soaps for bathing and soaps for use in the washing machines that were available to consumers by the turn of the 20th century.